Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome back to the fourth and final session of Resistance School. Can we get a round of applause? We here at Resistance School are committed to taking learnings from leading academics and leading organizing practitioners and training you on how to reclaim, rebuild, and reimagine America. This semester, we focused on core skills centered on one of the foundational points of organizing, which is leadership. Together, we've worked to craft a public narrative, we've built relationships, and we've developed a theory of change, all in 3 sessions that you can find on our website. For the fourth and final session, we're very excited to have Heather Booth teach us on how to develop a strategic plan. By the end of tonight, you'll learn each step of political strategy, from creating organizational goals, mapping out allies and opponents, to choosing the most effective method to achieve your goals. And now a little bit about our speaker, Heather Booth. Heather Booth is a legendary leading organizer for progressive issues and campaigns. She's definitely an inspiration for the younger organizers or aspiring organizers like myself who have taken grand steps and really started from the very bottom. She began her career as an organizer during the civil rights, anti-Vietnam War, and women's movements of the 1960s. And she is now not only the founder, but also the president of Midwest Academy, the go-to training school for social change makers. Previously, Heather was the training director for the Democratic National Committee, the director of the NAACP National Voter Fund, and the lead consultant during the founding of the Campaign for Comprehensive Immigration Reform. She also, along with her many long list of things that she's done, she's also directed the healthcare campaign for the AFL-CIO, the campaign passing President Obama's first budget, and the founding of Americans for Financial Reform. She was the first national coordinator for the Marriage Equality Coalition and the 2013 Supreme Court decision, and strategic advisor to the Alliance for Citizenship, which is the largest coalition for immigration reform. She is now the field director for Americans for Tax Fairness, working to stop tax cuts to the wealthiest paid for by cuts to Medicare, education, and other support for working families. So whether you want to grow an organization, empower the members of your community to take action, or to hone your organizing and leadership development skills, we hope that this training will help you magnify your impact and sustain progressive change. Please help me in welcoming Heather.
And thank you, Claris, and all the students and others who made this training possible and provide the Resistance School.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also to some of the other staff who played a very good organizing role with me, from Adam Hawksby and Connor Hand and many others whose names I may not know. Thank you. Respect them all. Part of organizing is celebrating ourselves, building that beloved community that Dr. King talked about, even within our organizations. And I also want to recognize Richard Parker, who initially invited me. He's a professor at the Kennedy School and has been an inspiration in my life, a Renaissance man. Richard? And now he's embarrassed enough. This session will be a discussion of strategy and strategic planning, building on what you've learned before about the story of self, us and now, about building one-on-one relationships, about a theory of change. Now we add on strategy. First, though, I'm going to tell you some of my background in a few organizing campaigns and lessons that I draw from it that will lead us to a strategic sense and a framework for a strategic plan that we'll come to at the next part of the session. The overall lesson of all of the work that I've done, and perhaps you've done, is if we organize, we can change the world, but only if we organize. In the civil rights movement, I became active in 1960 around the sit-ins, but in support of them. But in 1964, I went to Mississippi with the Freedom Summer Project. Many of you may have heard about the Summer Project. This was a time when the lives for poor black people in Mississippi was really a state of terror. And it seemed like in Mississippi, not much more could be done. And so there was an attempt to get the attention of people from the north down south, and students came down. Marshall Gans, who was part of the wonderful training, wonderful organizing mentor for so many, he was also part of the summer project with hundreds of others. I was 18 years old, and the attempt was to shine a spotlight on what was happening in Mississippi. It became more infamous because early in the summer, 3 young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, were murdered at the hands of the Klan. You may have heard about those murders, but what you may not know is that while they were looking for the 3 young men, they found the bodies of 8 other black men whose hands had been bound or feet chopped off, one in the Tallahatchie or Pearl River. They lived in such a state of terror that those disappearances hadn't even been reported. And when they found the bodies, they weren't really investigated, and they were treated as cold cases 20 years or more later, when finally some of them were resolved. Black lives did not matter in Mississippi in 1964. This is me at 18 years old in Shaw, Mississippi. We were doing voter registration, just engaging people, and then we were picked up just before what was my first arrest. This is Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm at her house in Rollville, Mississippi. She's there with 2 of her friends. She was a great heroine, both of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, as well as a great heroine, really, to all of America. There I am playing the guitar. She was a courageous leader, and when the Democratic Party and the Republican Party wouldn't let an integrated registration, integrated participation, she became co-chair of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party with Reverend Ed King. Whoop. Now, moving from a time of such terror, because people organized in Mississippi, door to door, house to house, speaking to people, building a base, engaging people who are really affected by the conditions, because of the bravery and courage of people in Mississippi, and because of the alliances built and the additional power brought to bear from around the country. Within a year, there was a Voting Rights Act, and Mississippi now has more African American elected officials than any other state in the country. Now, we still know there's a long way to go. There is incredible pushback. Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, names that we may not even know yet. We know there's a pushback on voting rights, on civil rights, but we make progress when we organize. I returned to my campus in 1965, and the women's movement was emerging. This is from one movie. Telling the truth is very revolutionary, and we need to speak truth to power, as Julian Bond said from the civil rights movement, and one movement trains and teaches another. One action of organizing, one campaign I was in the early women's movement, was in the early 1970s. I was a young mother with 2 little kids, Jean and Dan right there. I love those kids. And like many women of my generation, wanted to return to work. But in order to do that, we needed to have high-quality childcare available that we could afford. And in the city I lived in, Chicago, there was no paid childcare. There was no city-funded childcare. So we decided to set up our own childcare center. It would have been the Sojourner Truth Center, but when we went to the city to try and set it up, we were sent on an endless loop of 32 different offices, and then back to the first one, not having made progress and getting even 1 permit. We realized we really needed to organize. And so we set up an organization. We set up the Action Committee for Decent Childcare, ACDC. Get it? We were part of organizing for all people for childcare. There I am as a young mother with my son Gene in a demonstration we had for childcare. And what we decided was that our goals would be, our long-term goal would be free 24-hour client-controlled childcare. That was the sign, because we felt people had 24-hour shifts. We'd only put children in, of course, for a short period of time, but they were for people on night shift, day shift. We also wanted free, a long-term goal. But we decided also that the city should provide funding for childcare and that they had to revamp the childcare licensing laws so that you don't have 32 stops without making any progress. We then organized. We went into, we asked the head of one of the departments that we thought might have a role on childcare and asked for a meeting. And because we didn't have the power at the start to actually win fully, we said, well, could you do a study about what childcare was available and what was needed in the city, and then we could evaluate it. She agreed to meet with us, but not agreeing to the study. We brought 30 women with our children down to City Hall. It was very intimidating. Some of the women had never been downtown without their husbands before. It was an integrated group. That was racially integrated. That itself was pretty shocking in those times. We go down their marble walls and long halls, and it was very frightening. We get into the room, and the woman we were supposed to meet with isn't there. We decide to wait. Some said, well, let's leave. We decided to wait. We're waiting, and the kids are getting a little agitated. We start by singing, row, row, row your boat, and then we sing, we shall not be moved. And then some of the kids need a diaper change. We're a little embarrassed, but we start to change the diapers. We say, what will we do with this? And then we realize, she's given us the poop. Let's give it back to her. We put it on a table. We put a big ribbon around it with a note, and no more poop. So, and then the kids start rifling through the files. They're getting a little bored. And we say, no, stop that. Don't do that. And then we realize, no, we're looking for the study. Do that. And we find the study. At that point, we call the press. The press shows up miraculously. The woman we're supposed to meet with, the administrator, comes in and says, oh, I didn't know you were waiting. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, you wanted a study. We don't have the study. Oh, you found the study. And we then pressed for an intermediate demand, which would be hold hearings around the city in every city council or aldermanic district so that we can then use that for further organizing. We did, and within less than a year, organizing parents and childcare providers and from faith communities and from others in support of knowing that corporations and others who knew that women needed to return to the workforce, just a few corporations, we won, and the daycare rules were revised. We won a panel made up of parents and childcare providers to, in an ongoing way, review childcare in the city, and we won $1 million for childcare when $1 million was real money. And that was from organizing. Now the struggles continue. I became a labor organizer, and in 1968, many of you may have heard about the struggle in Memphis. Next year will be the 50 years of the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. Let me tell you the background of the strike. All the sanitation workers, the garbage men, were African American. They were mistreated in that they had low wage, poor protective clothing, poor security standards. And they also had to stay by their garbage trucks during torrential storms in Memphis. And you know how a garbage truck has a big maw in the back. To get out of the rain without protective clothing, some of the men went into the back of the truck. There was no protection on the gear. Someone hit a gear, and the men were crushed. The men went to management and said, we want a union. We can't be treated like this. We need protection. And management said no. They went out on strike, and here was the famous picture, I am a man. All the garbage workers, the sanitation workers there were men at that time. Dr. King was brought down to the strike, and he was killed. But because people organized in Memphis and around the country, because the message was sent out, the story was told, they won their union. Now we know the struggle continues. This is the struggle of the fight for 15. No one who works should live in poverty. And the fight for 15 will help raise the floor. We know there's also a pushback on labor rights. This is Governor Walker in Wisconsin. And he is standing with people as he is signing the legislation undermining collective bargaining in that state. We know there's a pushback But when we organize, we can win. With money I won from a back pay suit, I started a training center, partly saying, I'll never get fired again. I started a training center called Midwest Academy. Here's the manual of Midwest Academy. And there are 3 basic principles of the organizing that we encourage. They're part of also developing a strategy. One is to give real improvements in people's lives based on our values that we explain to people and that they know they're fighting for something concrete in addition to justice, freedom, democracy. Important as those are, they also are fighting for air they can breathe, to walk the street safely, to have more money in their pocket. They know what the struggle is for. The second is to give people a sense of their own power. So they're not gaining something because a benevolent elected official or corporate head or administrator has given something, though I'm all for that, but it's because people were involved in the struggle and won this themselves. And therefore they'll be stronger and more confident for the struggles in the future. And the third is that you win structural reforms. That means holding those in power more accountable so they are less the unaccountable power we currently see. And there are patterns in place, structures in place for the future. It also means building our own organization. And a key thing is organizers organize organizations. So you're there to fight for the next day. On immigration reform, this is the last one I'll go over right now. I've got 1492 because as long as there were immigrants coming to this country, there has been a battle for immigration reform in one way or another. And the same is true of every struggle. They start at the back when the first people feel that kind of oppression, and they continue on now and into the future. These are the beautiful pictures of the We Are America rallies throughout the country, celebrating this country, saying, we are this country, we are America. It's all of us, all of America. And here again, I start with an arrest. This was another arrest. One of the many tactics, but only one, that we take in this struggle. When immigration reform was starting, when I was starting at least working on it, perhaps 30% of the country believed that there should be a pathway to citizenship. That figure is nearly 70% now. People believe we should be a welcoming country. And that's happened only because people have organized. And if we organize, we can change this world. It is not a question of if, it is only a question of when, if we organize. So I thank you for the organizing you've done and that you're about to do. And I welcome you to the resistance. But it is more than resistance. It is resistance. It is organizing, meaning reaching out, talking to people we might not otherwise be talking to motivate those who weren't involved, and for those who didn't think they even wanted to be related, finding ways to persuade them. So motivation and persuasion, building our power, resistance, organizing, moving it into elections. First, just a question of what is a strategy? If you analyze where you are now and what you have, and you figure out where you want to be, where do you want to get to, what do you want to win, and you say, what are the steps to get there? That step, those steps, that plan is a strategy. This is one tool that you can use for developing a strategy. There are 5 categories. I'll go through them each briefly, and then as I go through them, I'll bring up a slide that shows in detail some of the questions you ask and items to consider in each section of the strategy. And the parts fit together, and then following this, we'll have 2 extraordinary organizers of the next generation go through a strategic planning example. But I'm also going to use the childcare example that I gave in the first telling of my story. Remember Action Committee for Decent Childcare? Who remembers that coming up? At least some. And we'll see, we'll try and refresh your memory. And if there are answers of you think what we did for our strategic planning based on the strategy chart. With that example, I'd like you to call them out. So the key question under each category. First, on goals. The basic question is, what do you want? What would victory look like? What would a win be? The second, organizational considerations. What resources do you have, and what do you need? The third, constituencies. I sometimes call it the brutal category because really it's the question of who cares? Who would actually want to fight on this? Who would have their life improved by it? The next are either decision makers or targets. It's not the same as enemies. We have lots of enemies, the Koch brothers and others, but they may not have the power to give us what we want. That's what decision makers and targets is. Who can give us those goals that we mentioned in the first category? And the last are tactics. What are all the actions you can take in order to influence the decision makers, recruit and support those constituencies, strengthen the organization to win your goals? And before I go through them, I'll just say that it is a bit like a flow chart, so that you know how if you change one quality on a chart, you've got, you change the dollar amount. If you think you have $10, it's one set of answers. But if it's really $1,000, it goes and all the parts of the chart move on. The same with the strategy chart. So I'm now going to go through goals. On goals, there are two ways to look at goals. The first is by time. By the way, much of this, you'll look at it and you'll say, well, that's obvious. And yes, I actually believe that organizing is largely the obvious made explicit. But sometimes when it's not explicit, people don't follow the steps routinely and forget. And also, it's able to be shared, and everyone's on the same explicit basis. So there are two ways to look at it. One is by timing, and one is by kind of goal. First, I'm going to do by timing. There's short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. Short-term is what's the first thing you want. Like on childcare, what was the first demand we made when we couldn't achieve everything we wanted at first? Does someone remember in childcare? We went down to see an administrator. We wanted the licensing changed, and that was a longer-term goal. Exactly right.
But the 32 places that you went.
We went to 32 places, and it showed the licensing was messed up. You're exactly right. And so one of the things we wanted, our long-term goals, let's actually start there. Our long-term goals was a change in the licensing, that it wasn't a crazy, you didn't have a 32-step process. Let's do the long-term goals. What was another long-term goal we wanted on childcare? 24-hour, who was saying that? Say it again. 24-hour, client-controlled, free childcare. Long-term goal. We didn't quite have the resources to win it right away. And then not being able to win that, not being able to win much of anything to start, we did ask for something that we actually won. Anyone remember what that was? What? A study. We asked for a study. Hard for them to say no to a study. Some call that, the Alinsky organizers have called that a fixed fight. So you're asking for something, the answer kind of has to be yes, but people can feel that they want it because they did. If they didn't ask, they wouldn't have gotten it. And then we also asked for hearings around the city. So you're looking for your long-term goal, your short-term goal, and mid-term goals. And the place that many people have trouble is a mid-term goal. And then for your goals, you also want to know, if you don't get it, what's your fallback position? If they said no to a study, what would we have asked for? Well, can we have discussions with you about a study? So what's your fallback? And what's your elevating? If they say yes, what else do we want to ask for? On childcare, we asked for hearings around the city. And then getting those, it allowed us to organize. So that's on time. On kind of goal, it's the three principles I laid out before. What were concrete improvements in people's lives, giving people a sense of their own power and altering the relations of power? There's actually a goal that we went for that hit on each of those. And some of these repeat by time. what was the concrete improvement people would have had at the end of the childcare study? What?
They're going to be able to work.
Going to be?
The women could work.
The women could work because there would be childcare. Marina, excellent answer. The women could work. And the improvement was there was childcare. We did set up the Sojourner Truth Childcare Center. Give people a sense of their own power. By going to these community forums, we were able to empower people. I'll tell you a short story about one. Because again, we went to places not where we already had the support, or not only where we already had support, which we did, but we went to places where we didn't have full support. We went to a Lithuanian community on the southwest side of Chicago. And the alderman, city council member, came in with a group that's like the alt-right groups of today, the John Birch Society, and came in attacking the women. We were meeting in a church basement, and they said, aren't any of you good mothers? Don't any of you know how to take care of your kids? And first they'll talk about childcare, and then they'll talk about abortion. And I am sitting there chairing the meeting thinking, I am not going to get out of here alive. And other than prayer, what I relied on was the organizing. And one woman stood up and said, you know I'm a good mother, but my husband was killed in Vietnam. I have to work. And in order to work, I need childcare. And once she found her voice, once she told her story, one after another stood up and spoke to the same issue. And we moved on the whole organization. So this is goals. Questions on that? All obvious. So these are the goals. On childcare, long-term, free 24-hour client-controlled childcare, more childcare in Chicago, meeting with the administrator, and the kinds of goals we just described. Now we go to decision makers. I'm jumping on the chart. The issue about decision maker is who has the power to decide. And it's not a general issue like management or the board of directors, or it's a specific person. What's the person's name? What's the background? And you want to do what we often call get the book on that person. Who influences that person? What do they like? What don't they like? Who do they like? Who have they listened to in the past? And then we often can't get to the main target decision maker, but we can get to someone through that decision maker. So on childcare, who were the main decision makers? Who can you imagine? I may not have said it in my telling the story, but who do you think would make decisions on childcare, $1 million for childcare and revising childcare licensing in a city? The mayor. So that would, mayor, city council, those are two of the key people. There might be others. Then for each one, we would list them and say, well, who could influence them? And where are they? And when we look at elected officials, there's at least 3 kinds of elected officials, though there are more. First, there are champions. We love those champions. We want them to speak out. Perhaps they can influence someone else. Then there are people who are totally against us. There's some who are so against us, they're never going to change. And then there are those who we believe we can change. It may be hard, but we believe we can change them. And then we do the analysis and move to constituencies. So these are aldermen or city council members, mayor, and the administrator for human relations. There also were 32 departments. We could have chosen any of those departments and found another way in if we couldn't get a way in with the first one. The next category, constituencies. This is who care, and there's at least 3 things to think about on constituencies. One is whose problem is it and who cares enough to actually fight on it, whether or not they're fighting at the start. A second kind of constituency are those people who may not have it as a direct problem, but either because they know people with it as a problem and are hearing those stories so react, or out of moral conviction or political conviction, but an interest says that they will also work on that issue. The third category under constituencies are those who are the opponents, and we need to keep them in mind so that we have some strategy that is countervailing to the opponents. May not win them over, may not even care if we win them over, but we have to build enough power of those who are affected and those who will also join the struggle against those opponents. On childcare, who were the constituencies on childcare? The children, and bringing the children along, that first demonstration. First of all, the women wouldn't have been allowed out of the house. They didn't have childcare. They needed the kids, and we wanted to be with our kids. So that was one good thing. And the stories about children and what it means. There's another photo I didn't use today, but that where the children are holding up signs saying, "Mommy needs childcare, so do I." Who else was a constituency? Who was a base? What? The mothers, a key constituency, and building a sense of women's self-confidence when, as I said, many of the women barely would speak up in public before they learned about their own power. Were there other allies or constituencies we brought in? Other young women? And those associated with a growing women's movement that was developing at the time. We also went to childcare providers, because that was a way that we could also find women who were together. It was an institution. Finding the institutions were key. And then we also found other institutions. There were faith-based institutions that wanted, there were a number of churches or synagogues that wanted to build childcare in their centers, in their institutions, but weren't allowed to because there were very prohibitive rules that only benefited two big contractors in the city. I mean, just an example, one rule was you couldn't have a center below grade, so you couldn't have a center in a basement. Or in order to have a visible exit sign, like this exit sign here, you needed to have a generator on your property. When in fact, a reflective sign or a sign like this with a light bulb in it would have been adequate. But it was designed just to benefit the contractors. So those were our constituents. Parents, providers, institutions, child advocates, voters, and we had to go to each area of the city, so we had the voters in those aldermanic city areas, and experts in childcare. Then we had organizational considerations. And this is a question of what resources do we have, what do we need? If you have $12.60, it's not likely you're going to win free 24-hour client-controlled childcare. So either you need to increase your resources, or you need to focus on an intermediate or shorter-term demand. And what are kinds of organizational resources you'd consider? Not so much in the childcare story alone, but just in any effort. What are some examples of resources? You're building an organization, you want to fight to win, and anyone. What's some things you need?
You need the woman who stood up and said, "My husband was killed in Vietnam."
Absolutely. You need leadership, and leadership development is central. What's your name? Anne Bryan, thank you so much. What other resources would you need? Yeah?
We need diverse skill sets.
Diverse skill sets. What are some examples?
So communications, someone who has leadership, maybe accounting, if you are bringing in finances.
All of these. That's great. What's your name?
Emily.
Emily, thank you so much. Other resources. People who've built organizations, what do you usually think about first? You're trying to build the organization. You've got 6 volunteers. They may show up, they may not, they're working. What else do you need?
Money.
Money! You may need money. Now, Indivisible, just as an example, has done enormous efforts as a volunteer effort, but there now is some staff to provide support. Any other resources people want to throw out?
Research.
Research, again, one of the expertise that Emily said. Thank you, Zaida. And so you list all of those considerations with specifics. We have this much, we need this much, and into your plan, how are you going to develop those resources? So this is the press, funding. We were in the YWCA, we had congregational support, and then moving to tactics. Tactics are the actions that you put into a sequence in your strategy, and all the tactics, one after another, put out in a thoughtful sequence, is your strategic plan. The main rule for tactics, going back to the strategy chart, is that the tactics need to be ones that build your constituency and reflect what your constituency want. They need to show your power and create influence with the decision maker to move them. They should build your organization in order to win your demands, so that all the parts fit together. Now, what often happens is people think of tactics first, with reason, and often that works and is a great way to start. An unarmed black man is killed or shot. We're going down to the police station or the mayor's office. Hands up, don't shoot. Brilliant tactic, brilliant approach, and changing the conversation around the country. And then the tactical discussion with strategy would say, what are the steps of what comes next? How do we build on that so that we win and there's less murder, less killing of all, as well as of unarmed black men? So on tactics, the key is that they are ones your constituency wants, and what works for one constituency may or may not work with another. I was with a group of seniors who said, well, let's all, this is from one woman who had her walker. I feel I'm ready to join her fairly soon. But we're moving the walker, and then she's going to take her cane and say, don't undermine health care. Don't undermine health care. And then she acts out what the impact of undermining health care would be for her in her life. Very effective. Now, if we had teenagers doing the same thing, not so effective. You need the tactic that fits with your constituency. The other thing is the tactics should probably be ones that are fun, that embolden your people so that they feel more confident, ready to go on the next time. Have them on your territory, not just the others. When we went to downtown with the childcare fight, it was very intimidating going into City Hall, very intimidating. But when we had meetings in community centers in each city council district, we were on our territory, on streets that people were comfortable with. So the tactics, here were some of the tactics that we used. We had internal training, and training like this and other kinds is a key part of organizing. We met with the city itself, the city officials. We met in people's own districts and churches and YWCAs. We had hearings. We had some official hearings in those districts. We had rallies. We had a hearing in City Hall, personal stories. We had the churches and other congregations, synagogues would also integrate this into their sermons. Those were some of our tactics. Right now, I'm in the fight on against the tax cuts for the millionaires, billionaires, and largest corporations that will lead to cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and education. By the way, right now I'm in a fight against the tax cuts for the millionaires, billionaires, and largest corporations that will lead to cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and education. Have I told you that I am in a fight right now against the millionaires and billionaires and largest corporations who will get tax cuts that will just lead to cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and education? We tested out and knew that that was an effective message. And on message, repetition is your friend. I don't know if I've told you this, but repetition is your friend. By the way, I wanted to ask you, what is your friend? Repetition. Oh, and what is repetition? My friend. Ah, okay, wonderful. At least we, the obvious made explicit. You know, McDonald's says they need to show an ad 7 times before people even remembered they saw an ad. Message is important, that it's on our terrain, our terms, and we know what hits people. The thing about that particular message is it's a trade-off message. It's not just no money for the millionaires, billionaires, and largest corporations, which would be bad enough, but it's how it hits regular people. How does it hit our interest? Because the key question under constituency is really our values and our self-interest. So message is crucially important, and the trade-off, it will lead to cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and education, and then fill in the blank, child nutrition, or whatever else. We're going to move to the last section of this program. And there'll be time for more discussion later. And for that, we'll be taking about 10 minutes with two of the most skilled organizers of the next generation. Lindsay McCluskey started organizing for affordable and accessible public higher education, and then became the president of the United States Student Association in 2009 and 2010. She then worked for the AFL-CIO in Massachusetts and is now the senior organizer with the Community Labor United in Boston. She is a remarkable organizer and leader, and it's been our joy. She's also been a trainer for Midwest Academy for many years. And Beth Huang, she trained with Midwest Academy and then led the training programs for young people in the grassroots organizing weekend training. She also was a leader of this training with the United States Student Organization and now works with Midwest Academy promoting it through a program called Galvanize. She's now the field coordinator at the Massachusetts Voter Table, which is the State Voices civic engagement table of people who have field operations in Massachusetts. Both of them are national treasures. I'm so proud they're my friends, and I look forward to learning from them as they describe a strategic planning situation they're entering into and how they would use the strategy chart.
Great. My name is Beth, and I will be taking you through a relevant example of how to use the strategy chart as a way to organize and to win. So the example that Lindsay and I will be presenting is how we would use the strategy chart to pass the Clean Dream Act. How many of you have heard of the movement to pass a Clean Dream Act after the rescinding of deferred action for childhood arrivals? Okay, great. And how many of you are inspired by the movement of especially young, undocumented folks in the US, and that's one of the reasons why you're resisting and you're in this room today? Okay, great. So our intermediate goal, and remember that's the demand that's immediate to what we're trying to do that Heather was mentioning before, is to pass a clean version of the DREAM Act where there are no compromises and no one is used as a bargaining chip. So the longer term goals associated with passing a clean version of the DREAM Act is a pathway to citizenship for all immigrants, as well as, because the DREAM Act is really focused on young people's opportunities in the US. We as alumni of the US Student Association, we especially believe that universal free public higher education is absolutely part of ensuring that all young people, regardless of documentation status, can have access to higher education. In the short term, because we are Massachusetts residents, we want to make sure that Representative Seth Moulton publicly supports the Clean Dream Act and commits publicly to not making compromises with the Trump administration on the border wall, on increased border security, and other proposals that he may have. So I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay to talk about the organizational considerations.
Great. So the DREAM Act is one of these issues that Beth and I have worked on for probably close to 10 years. It's been a long, long fight, and we seem to have to keep coming back to it over and over. And there have been many organizations that have contributed to that fight. But locally here, the organization that we're connected to that would be taking the lead on this work is a local immigrant youth organization made up of undocumented youth and allies. So there's an organization here called the Student Immigrant Movement. So things that we have to put into the fight. We have 70 active members across the state. That's active, that come out to meetings, that participate in our tactics regularly, 70 active young people. We have 3 staff members that are paid by the organization. We have office space in downtown Boston. We have a list of 1,500 supporters who participate in various events or tactics that we run. 250 of these people are in the 6th Congressional District where Congressman Moulton is based. So things that we want. We want to increase our membership through this fight. We don't have a whole lot of members in the North Shore in the 6th Congressional District, so we want to identify 15 immigrant youth on the North Shore that can become members of our organization through this fight. We also want more money, as do many of our organizations, so we want to identify 50 new individual donors through this fight. And internal problems that we need to be aware of. One is that our staff is going through some transition right now. We have a small staff, and a couple of those staff members are moving on, and new staff members are coming in to replace them. And that can create a little bit of instability or a real need to do some conscious planning around those transitions. And as I mentioned before, we have few leaders who live in the 6th Congressional District, so we're really going to need to reach deeply into our bases and rely also on our allies to help us find constituents of Congressman Moulton that can be part of this fight.
Okay, so now that we have determined what our intermediate goal is, and we've done an inventory of what we have in the organization, now we're going to focus on how to build the power of people to win this fight. So the people who are directly affected and we want to develop as those new leaders are undocumented youth in the 6th Congressional District in Massachusetts to get Congressman Moulton to commit to no compromises with the Clean Dream Act. So we know that this group alone is not going to be able to win the fight. And so that's why we need to bring in lots and lots of allies. I'm just curious, does anyone here live in the North Shore in the 6th Congressional District? Okay, maybe just a little bit outside. And so we know that we're gonna need a lot of allies to be able to win this fight. There was a very recent ballot question that passed in Salem, Massachusetts, reaffirming sanctuary status in that city. That's where Seth Moulton lives. So there's a already organized base of people who have worked on a similar issue. And so a very natural first ally who we want to bring into the campaign to make sure that their congressman does not compromise would be the Friends of Sanctuary organization that just passed the local sanctuary ordinance just last Tuesday. Another set of organizations that have been active in the fight for immigrant rights in Massachusetts but aren't themselves immigrants, or not all of them are immigrants, include the Massachusetts Teachers Association. That's the biggest teachers union in the state. They make lots of endorsements in elections and are one of the very important political players in Massachusetts. There's a coalition focused on education justice in Massachusetts called the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance. They care about they care about students and teachers, and since this bill is really focused on immigrant youth, they also seem like a natural partner. There's an advocacy organization called the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition that works on policy, that has worked with DACA students for years now. And finally, we also have the UMass Board of Trustees, which is the decision-making body for the biggest public education, higher education body in the state. The center, unfortunately, we do have some opponents to neutralize. In Massachusetts, the Center for Immigration Studies, which sounds innocuous enough, has been opposing a assume that they will be active in this fight, pressuring Seth Moulton as well. And so these are some of the people who we want to build coalition with and build the power to ultimately win the fight in the long term. And now we're going to move on to the target himself.
So we already have revealed who the target is. The target in this case is Representative Seth Moulton. He was first elected to Congress in 2014 with 54% of the vote. He challenged an incumbent and was elected in that year, and then had no challenger in 2016. We've noticed that he's really trying to increase his profile leading up to 2020. He's been doing a lot of events in New Hampshire and is certainly trying to elevate his profile nationally, and probably has some big political ambitions.
Great. And so one more piece about Seth Moulton is we also know that one of the key things that he cares the most about is that he is a veteran, right? That's how he was able to win that uphill fight. And so, as Heather was saying before, this isn't just a static set of categories, but it's kind of a flow chart. So if you know one thing, then you might want to go back to another column. And so since we know that Seth Moulton is a veteran and cares a lot about veterans, we might want to bring in some advocacy organizations that he is already close to and bring them in as allies. Okay, so now that we have thought about the goals and our organization, the people who we want to organize and develop the leadership of, and who our decision maker is, now we can jump into talking about tactics and what we're going to do. What are some things that our constituents and allies could do to put pressure on Seth Moulton to reject any compromise on the Clean Dream Act?
So I think that one thing that we should do right away is set up a meeting with the congressman or with his staff. If we can't get a meeting directly with him, we can have local undocumented youth and allies share their stories, ideally people who are voters in his district, and that will probably give us a sense of where he stands and what his position is right now before we start escalating our tactics. Assuming that he's not with us right out the gate, generating an online petition or an in-person petition and getting large numbers of voters in the congressman's district to fill that out. Getting some presidents of local colleges and universities in his area or the UMass Board of Trustees, getting them all to sign on to a letter to the congressman to make him aware of their support and encouraging him to support the Clean Dream Act.
Okay, one of my favorite things once you've already gathered all of those petitions is to organize an in-person delivery of those petitions. And that's a great way to take the momentum that you build online and make a decision maker feel the pressure in person. So I would invite lots of organizations that are natural allies and partners to deliver those petitions with us to his district office in Salem. And then lastly, there's a tactic called bird dogging. Has anyone heard of it? Okay, so bird dogging is when you look up when a town hall might be, and so I would get his town hall schedule, have some folks from his district show up to the town hall and ask some pretty pointed questions to get a firm commitment, yes or no, to supporting a Clean Dream Act. And so we'll actually take maybe two suggestions for tactics.
And I think we can do that as so we can applaud their work, which is incredible. And maybe let's do a debrief together. They really are. Didn't they do a fabulous job? Thank you, Beth. So now as you would be part of a strategic planning committee. By the way, there are two benefits of going through strategic planning like this. One is you come up with better answers, because it's a group process, you think it through. And the other is the group stays together. So you come up with better answers, and then when the going gets tough and someone says, well, why did you do the online petition? That didn't work so well. You say, remember we all decided on that together? Is there something else we need to do? What would we do? So for group cohesion and for coming up with a better result, the strategic planning process, where the obvious is made explicit, works well. I actually thought this was so excellent. Some ways, not much more to add, and in some ways, any strategy can be as creative as the group involved. So, comments, Mr. Parker?
Would you be willing to add the Kennedy School to the list of pressure points on Congressman Bolton's graduate here?
That
Well,
sounds great.
So one thing is that if he's a graduate, is there some way that there's a Kennedy School interest? And so that might be under constituents. A great idea. Let's start. Actually, you can throw out in any category, but I actually think let's start with the goals. Okay, and I'm thrilled. Great. With their overall comments or with these comments on particular categories? Okay, let's just go systematically so people can see how we develop it. First of all, on the goals, again, terrific planning that they had. Anything else on the goals that you might think of? Any other goals? Yes. And was it Emily? What was your name? Anne.
Are we staying focused on midterm, that Bolton's your mid-level goal? Is that where we are right now, or are you asking for more goals?
Goals on moving Moulton. Yes. So on moving Moulton.
In that case, talking to Capuano.
So talking to another member that has a relationship to him and moving that member to talk to him. So that could both be a goal and a tactic, and it also could be a secondary target. So they may appear different places. That's a terrific idea. You obviously have done this before. Other thoughts on goals? We want to get to a winning goal. Okay, well, one thought I had, was there a comment there? Ask Jim McGovern. Ask other members. You have relationships with these members. One thing is to always consider what's your escalation position, your escalation goal. If he says, yes, I will, what else do you ask him to do? Would he talk to another member? Who is he close to that we don't have? Could he have set up a meeting with another member? Not even in Massachusetts. And then what's your fallback position? If you don't win one of those, well, what could you do? And then maybe you're going to some of these other members in order to get to him. You might also consider, are there other things would he hold a public forum on it? Whether he said yes or no, because the forum then would allow us to build more pressure, and it's an involvement demand. Might he even have an annual report, a quarterly report that tells us the status of immigrants in the community? I'm not saying any one of these are the right idea or wrong ideas. They're options to figure out how you keep connection to win concrete improvements in people's lives, give people a sense of their own power, and change the relations of power. Excellent on goals. Anything else there? Okay, then let's actually go to targets. Let's do targets next, which I actually find is convenient to do. Any other thoughts on Moulton? If you wanted to get the book on him, what's the background? What other things would you want to know about him, or are there aspects about him that you think you might want to hone in on? I think the veteran idea, again, they're doing the process, they're thinking of veterans. I was hit by the point that he wants to run for president. He has national aspirations, so this is no longer just a Massachusetts issue. Any way that you can get secondary people in there or constituencies in there that show a national audience, he may seek it, he may respond to it, and he doesn't want to undermine what sound like potentially a presidential interest. One thing is with people in New Hampshire. Perhaps there's a New Hampshire delegation that comes to visit him. Perhaps there are national organizations on other issues that have taken positions on immigration. there are environmental groups that have taken a Clean Dream Act position. There are faith organizations, national, and they may want to come in too. So finding out what Moulton's self-interests are and then matching them with our constituencies. Yes?
To your point, who are his fundraisers, who are his donors?
The donors, absolutely. Absolutely. Donors, voters, publicity. He also would not want negative publicity. If he didn't agree to meet and you showed up at his office with 100 people saying, we want this meeting on a Clean Dream Act, not the kind of publicity he would want, unless he may very well be responsive, in which case we raise him up as a champion. Then we go to constituencies. And in part, you see how the answers to this column feed the answers to this column. So people from New Hampshire, Kennedy School, veterans, the various organizations in his district. Who else is he close to in Congress? What are his donors? Who are their names? There was one time we were trying to get a statement against a foreign war. There were not that many people focused on the issue. And we got the person who was a senator's chair of his finance committee to write a letter to other donors saying, Senator so-and-so, who's not in office anymore, we would like you to take a position against the importation of arms in Central America. The senator had not responded at all before, but getting this letter from his donors with the grassroots pressure at his door, and he signed. So on constituents, any other constituents that come to mind?
About the Chamber of Commerce, people would employ.
Well, then the question is, when the chamber, actually, where's the chamber now on a Clean Dream Act? Do we know? But if not, we don't know right now. But for example, on the tax fight, the New Jersey chamber had come out against the tax bill because there's a way in which it will increase taxes on middle-income families in some of their states in New Jersey. So looking, are there ways to have divisions even within what might otherwise be seen as opposition? Great idea. Yes?
There are a lot of undocumented soldiers and undocumented veterans.
Excellent
So
idea.
it's a very narrow group of people, but if we could get someone that would advocate.
And elevating those stories amongst the most moving stories. Terrific. You clearly get the idea. And then let's go back to organizational considerations. Any thoughts you have on this? They've really outlined a number fairly well. One thing I'd say is thoughts on it? In organizations, when you're trying to move ahead, you probably want even concrete numbers. Now, this was an example, so it's not that it was a weakness of it, but that to say we have $105 now. At the end of this, we hope to have $250. We have these 5 leaders. One of them, during the course of this, we actually think should not be a leader anymore. One needs to have much greater confidence because they don't speak with confidence. One is doing very fine, and we just need to support more. And so having those names as they're moving forward, specificity on each of the categories. In the manual, the Midwest Academy manual, there's a strategy chart, there's 5 categories, and simple questions to ask. What you really do is you ask the simple questions, and you just start answering them. Who has the power to make the decision? Okay, we want this congressman. What are his interests? We write whatever we know. We'll learn as we go. Who might influence him? His voters, people out of the district, his friends in Congress. For someone who's overwhelmed, you came up with some of the best answers. And what I'm saying that for is, in fact, that's what it takes to start. You just start. Well, the events of the world overwhelm us. The perils that we face can overwhelm us. What these techniques we found, they can simplify it. And everyone can go through the process themselves, and we ask in a group. So what are we for? What are our goals? We want them to give us a Clean Dream Act. We want him to meet with us. We want him to hold a hearing in his district. Okay, what do we know about him? Okay, maybe 3 people should go out and do a little research on him. They do the research, they come back with what they've got, and we learn as we go. And what is empowering is we come up with answers, we try it, and then the kids find the study on childcare that they said didn't exist. That the woman who's the administrator says, yes, I'll hold those forums because she was embarrassed because she didn't tell us the truth on the study. But you don't know what you can get until you start. But if you organize, you can change the world. I would say this was a terrific exercise. Thank you so much. And as we wind down this session, I thank you all for participating who are in the room and also those who are watching it at a distance. My encouragement is to try and do exactly what Anne was describing. Take this home for an issue you're working on, whether it's immigration or healthcare or environment, a local issue, a national issue, and try it. And then try it with some others in your core group, your leadership group, and then your membership. See what a rich plan you come up with. There's no such thing as perfection, but you learn as you go. You have to start. Hopefully this has given you some tools to make that start a little easier. Did you feel that that was true? There were a number of nodding heads. I'd say there's one other thing that I ask of you as you move out and apply this to the work that you're doing concretely, just as Anne described. And that is for this moment, for all the perils that we face on every issue, whether it's DACA or taxes or health care. I think the worst legacy of this period would be if people lose hope that we can actually build a better world. And our wish for you is that you function as agents of hope, that you bring this back to your communities, that you build on it, you learn by doing, and then you share with others. And you see that when we organize, we have changed the world. When we organize, we can change the world. And when you organize, you will change this world for the better. And I look forward to celebrating great victories together. Thank you all.
Please join me again in giving Heather another massive round of applause for that phenomenal session.
Thank you so much. That was so good.
And thanks to all of you, both in the room and at home. As Heather mentioned, a template of the strategy chart will be available online at www.ResistanceSchool.com, where you can fill it in with your organizations and as part of your movements. You can also find a recording of this session and all of the sessions this semester at the website, ResistanceSchool.com. This session concludes our fall 2017 semester focused on leadership. We hope what you learned tonight and in each of our sessions gives you the ability to reclaim, rebuild, and reimagine our communities. Resistance School will be back in the new year to build on these foundational leadership skills, and we're excited to continue providing trainings that help you create change in your communities. And we want to make sure we're providing what you need. So we want to hear from you. Let us know what worked well this semester, what we can improve, and what you want to see this upcoming spring. Complete our 3-minute survey shown at the end of the video, and you'll be entered into a raffle for a $50 Amazon gift card, just in time for holiday shopping. Finally, we've got one last request. Resistance School is run completely by volunteers. Creating, producing, and streaming these trainings costs money. And so to make free trainings that reach thousands of people, we need your help. Please go to www.resistanceschool.com and click Donate in the top right to contribute $15 or whatever you can give. Again, that's www.resistanceschool.com. Repetition is your friend. Your donation will go a long way to ensuring that we continue to train and sustain a more progressive America. And if you enjoyed what you saw this evening, Heather has recently released a documentary about her life and her work, and I'd encourage you to go and look at that at heatherbooththefilm.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next semester.